Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. How amazing it is to see that we're getting a thumbs up from the big technology gods of the universe. Interesting start again today. And boy, we are working for it here. And thank you for your prayers and for believing this can happen. And I think that the very first thing we should do this morning is just take a moment to turn within and really anchor ourselves in the presence of God. So just getting comfortable right here in this spectacular chair that is here only for me to be able to communicate with you. What a sweet knowing it is that everything in the universe is indeed in perfect order yet again this Sunday morning. And so as I sit in this special sacred place, blessing this time, knowing that we are connected and communing with each other through the miracle of technology, I just give thanks and I let it be. And so it is. Amen. Well, an interesting start. It's lucky that I don't waste my time giving you the backstory to what happened before we got to be connected today. But again, I am really, really grateful for these advancements in the world of technology and communicating that allow us to be quarantined and still to be able to create these spaces of sacredness where we can connect heart to heart. So I have a message this morning, and that's why we're all sitting here together. The title of my message is To Feast Upon Certainty, and I think I'll just jump right in. I took that talk title this morning from a quotation from the book Living the Science of Mind, written by the founder, Dr. Ernest Holmes. And this quote is one of those that really sort of rocks my world at the same time as it anchors me again in great wisdom and truth. I think it reminds me of the beauty of wisdom and wonder when we put them together. Here are the words of Ernest Holmes. We should abstain from contemplating uncertainties. I'll just repeat that. We should abstain from contemplating uncertainties, and we should enter instead into a long and eternal period of feasting upon certainty, upon that which we know for sure. And then if we do that, then when the world cries, "Where are you, God?" something within us will answer, "I know in whom I have believed." So that is a glorious place for us to start this adventure this morning, where we're looking for anything to be certain about. And yet we are living in a time of great uncertainty. And I think what's really interesting for me is that in these early days of being sheltered in place, there was all this wisdom coming to us from the medical world that was telling us how to be safe. And they said, you got to rest and eat, and you got to get exercise. And above all else, don't have stress, because it's difficult for your immune system to stay strong and healthy if you are stressed out. And then they would give us all this stressful news about this interesting virus that we knew nothing about. And so it's human nature for us to be stressed in uncertain times or uncertain situations. And at the same time, I want us to really focus on, as Holmes says, feasting on certainty. Just relishing and basking in the truth of those things that are certain and sure. And so I like thinking of that statement, what I know for sure today. What I know for sure today. Always on the last page of the Oprah magazine, when I used to subscribe years ago, on the last page, it was always the first thing I read. And she would write a little ditty about the things that she absolutely knew for sure this day. And I think what's so relevant in considering that is that it's just what I know today, because tomorrow I can't be sure. And I really sit in a place in my own personal journey, and I invite you to think about the same, and that is to be open in order to be open-minded and to have an open heart, to soften our hearts, to be able to open and not closed and constricted, in order to do that, we have to find a certain peace in being comfortable in uncertainty. And I like the wisdom of Dr. Holmes, in which he calls us to stand strongly in that which we can be certain of. So when everything else is going crazy and people are frightened, we can say, I know in whom and in what I have believed. And we can use that as sort of the principle for which we live and move and have our being in this activity of life. So there's wisdom in that way we rather look for the balance to stand between certainty and uncertainty without wavering in our spiritual awareness. So I'm speaking today about what you know for sure, but I'm also speaking today about what we don't know. And finding that fine line is really a vast spiritual truth in all religious traditions. So we teach a practical spirituality here. We stand in spiritual ideas that can be implemented in our daily lives in a very physical, intentional way. And I think that spiritual principle in general, no matter what faith you stand in, no matter what your religious tendencies or even your more secular look at spiritual ideas, no matter what that is, there's some wisdom in the study of love and law, what some of the ancient philosophers and spiritual seekers and poets have written about, that there's this idea of love and law. And well-rounded teachings will have an emphasis on both. So spiritually speaking, there's doing and there's being. So when I'm practicing spiritual activity, I'm praying. You know, I may decide to create a treatment or an affirmative prayer to use to help myself get clear about the spiritual truths I know. But there's also the being side, which is about not doing. And that's where we sit in the stillness. That's where we look at the holiness of contemplation from a high perspective. So there's knowing and not knowing, action and inaction, being and doing, and all of it comes together to be this process of what the great sages have called love and law. When I look at the history of sort of the spiritual evolution in life, what I see is there have always been teachers who bring a great understanding of what we would consider or call law-based spirituality. Thomas Troward is a great metaphysician who dared to look at a sort of a legalistic, he was a judge, a legalistic way of understanding spiritual principles so that we can apply it. We can study it, learn about it, apply it in our lives. Phineas Parkhurst Quimby was a medical minded, he was a clockmaker, but he had an understanding of the way we can heal ourselves. We can use science in a spiritual application. And so these are great examples of the wisdom of looking at the scientific side of spirituality. You might say we could look at Teilhard de Chardin. We could look at Swedenborg from the I think he was the 1700s. I'm not really sure, but we get that they had a strong spiritual way of standing in truth that was very legalistic and what we would call law-based. But you can also look at the Christian mystics. Emma Curtis Hopkins, a lovely author and a great sagey, wise woman who applied principles to understanding the mystical side of spiritual life, but she did it in a very love-based way. That's what mysticism is. Meister Eckhart from the 13th century would be a really good example of the same. And so there were always, throughout history, poets and philosophers and religious people who had some strong sense of intuiting or sensing a divine presence, and then articulating how it was to have that particular experience. But I think there are also people historically, in the roots of spiritual traditions, there are people who have mastered that place between wisdom and wonder, that place between love and law, or have demonstrated what it looks like to practice both love and law. And probably Ralph Waldo Emerson is a great example of that. Jesus of Nazareth is a perfect example of it, exactly that idea of blending both. In fact, that's the whole purpose of the teachings of Jesus, for us to come to understand a more whole package. So all of us are called individually into some kind of a relationship with something that's greater than we are and something that's invisible. And so it makes a difference to know what you believe. When you know what you believe, you can align yourself to spiritual truth in a way that serves you. And it gets dicey when we realize that we all have a sort of a different way of intuiting and aligning ourselves and living in that divine flow of life. But we definitely want to find our own place of certainty. Holmes worded it this way: we must be completely convinced that the universe is a spiritual system governed by a beneficent consciousness that's greater than we are. And that is the best place to start. We start at the beginning by recognizing that idea of a power and a presence for good, that life is for us. We study the universe, and if we learn that, that's where we stand, and that's where we can gain our strength, and that's where we get this magnificent certainty, the sureness of life. It's where in the Old Testament, where the prophets could say, they could proclaim, I'm strong in the Lord and the power of its might. I'm strong in the Lord. That's that place of perfect balance and foundation, where I can say, I recognize there's a presence and a power in this universe. It is a power for good. It's greater than I am, and I can use it, right? That's the firmness, the certainty that we're talking about. It's that certainty where we can know, where we have moments of knowing that the grace of God is actually the givingness of God. The way in which that grace is always pouring out, and we can look around in nature and see it and recognize it, and at the same time stand in it as though we're vessels, just filling up with that gorgeous raining grace, somewhat like the jacarandas and the Palo Verde, which are all blooming now here in the desert. So we know, we can then go to the New Testament and know that we live and we move and we have our being in spirit itself. That's pretty certain. That's a certainty that can feed us and comfort us. And at the same time, it invites us to be open to more that's happening in life. You know, if you think you have it all figured out, you kind of get stuck sometimes and you hang on to the shore. And so when life gets bumpy, you can be found. Sometimes I get caught like hanging on to the shore. But when I'm certain in this God that I believe in, you know, the God in whom I stand, I live and move and have my being in, then I can let go. Sometimes it's like prying my fingers, but I can let go. And then you can feel like you're being held in a vessel a craft. I always see it as the hands of God, held sweetly in the hands of God, and then the currents of life that can, really blow storms through our lives. We can manage that if we can find that place of surrender, find that place where we can let go a little bit and know that this too shall pass and that we will be safe. So all of this brings me to something I wanted to mention this morning in terms of the research we have, not only in human development, because for many decades now, we have some great writings from all of the regarding human behavior and human development. And now we're looking at understanding our spiritual development as well. And, Dr. Beckwith, I can't think of his name. Michael Beckwith, who has created a great audience. He has a great platform now to speak these same truths we're talking about this morning. But Michael Beckwith has a fabulous interpretation or idea about our spiritual development. And he suggests, along with all the other researchers that have done this work, the work that Michael Beckwith studied in order to come up with these theories, but we start as victims. We start in the beginning where we're not very spiritually evolved yet, and it feels like everything that happens to us is coming from outside of us. So life happens to me. And at some point in our lives, and as we gradually grow and get a little more mature, we graduate into an ascended, we think of it as an ascended view. We suddenly become empowered. We suddenly begin to understand, wait a minute, I'm not a victim. And we become willing to take a stand for ourselves and to set healthy boundaries and to realize that we are accountable or responsible for our own lives, and that's not a bad thing. It's like an awakening where we realize how much we're in choice in our life. And so then the perspective changes completely. It's no longer being done to us, but my life is being done by me. I have choice, I have some power, I have control over the directions of my life and my attitudes, and I can grow and I can learn and I can see the continuous beauty of that ongoing growth. But what follows that is this idea of surrender. And so we're lifted by our empowerment, and then something happens along the spiritual journey where we drop into this sudden knowing that, my goodness, that was never my power alone, that is God working through me. And in that place where we quit trying to do all the work ourselves, we realize that we don't have to try and control all the circumstances of our life. We don't have to, and nor should we, control the people in our lives. And it's a difficult lesson, but when we have a taste of the freedom that comes with that kind of surrender, we move into seeing life completely differently. And what that is we don't see the brokenness of life. Whenever I'm open to the presence of God and I'm allowing Spirit to just move through me, then I see life in a way that I believe God looks at life, that there is nothing broken and nothing that needs to be fixed, but I can then recognize the holiness in all of life. Life is holy. And every condition brings us opportunity to deepen in our surrender and our understanding of holiness, but not to the point of giving up our certainty. See, you can only get to that place of surrender when you are certain about what you believe. Otherwise, you're still trying to control everything in the world, and you haven't realized that there's a way to let go of the shore. And then that final step that Beckwith speaks to is is that experience of oneness. It's a communion beyond all communions. It's that moment, and it only comes in moments where we have the intimacy of knowing that God itself is expressing as us. So in that place, there's a gentleness because we recognize that we're all the same. That's what we mean when we say things like we're all in this together. We're talking about humanity. We're not talking about the characteristics of how we're moving through the experience. We're talking about our humanity and the way in which we have equal opportunity to access the divine wisdom. So it's interesting because first we have to learn to empower ourselves. And so we ascend in this great way only to then mature and then deepen, which then looks like a descent, but it's a deepening in the experience that readies us for a better understanding of that oneness or that communion. Lifted, then deepened. Wisdom and wonder. I love the way it all comes together. So life isn't broken. We are moving through an experience. And I happen to be thinking in the last couple of weeks, actually, I've been thinking a lot about the way a lot of my friends really understand this already. You know, all of our friends that are in recovery have been practicing this stuff long before or along with their own spiritual wisdom. And in fact, the gift of a recovery program, like a 12-step program, and the beauty of what they bring to the world is that they teach that there's a way to find a God of our own understanding. Man, I so support that idea. I wrote a class last year called Finding Your Own Personal Theology. I think it's so important for us to examine our own ideas and our own beliefs so that we can stand in that certainty that we're talking about today. And in the 12-step program, you know, they have those sayings like, let go and let God. That's a surrender. That's a surrender we're all talking about and looking to have an experience of. But the most beautiful gift we get from the 12-step ideas, I believe, is that great serenity prayer. You know, God, give me the peace to just, you know, surrender that which is not mine to do, and give me the courage to do that which I know is mine to do. And then that gorgeous ending line that says, and give me the wisdom to know the difference. Oh, such a beautiful statement, a beautiful prayer. And I hope that we don't diminish the value of those words because they're so overstated. But I think if you overstate them as an affirmation and you can feel the power of it, then there's something really gorgeous in it. So I think the bottom line is it takes all of us a while to figure out how to find that balance between doing and being, you know, accepting and acting, having the courage to act and looking for that place in between. Ernest Holmes spoke about that transformation, about spiritual transformation, and he said it's seldom instantaneous. It can be. I mean, a lot of times you have a trauma in your life and suddenly you're much wiser than you were the day before. But for most of us, it happens over time. It happens as we take each step and move forward through whatever it is we're walking through. And so we learn we do have to be flexible. We can't be rigid, that we have to, like the tree, and we have to learn to bend our limbs a bit as we're moving through the storm. Here's a statement by Holmes. The ascent is slow, but each step entices us with the enchantment of a new vista. And then we can press on with joy. The ascent is slow, but each step entices us. We can move through our lives, when we begin to understand this, we can move through our lives with a bit of a joyous expectation, because around the next bend, we'll be able to see more. That which has been uncertain becomes a little clearer as we keep taking the steps and putting one foot in front of the other. And it's a slow process. I mean, my goodness, can you think of anything slower than the month of March? That was a god-awful long month. And I don't know about you, but some days felt like entire weeks. And what I think is beautiful about stepping into this first Sunday in May is that it's pretty clear we're rounding a bend, right? It's not over, but we're rounding a bend and we can see more. We have more information. We have magnificent, brilliant minds working on understanding the nature of this virus that's created this pandemic, that's quarantined us, that has slowed us down and given us this opportunity to breathe and to practice our faith. Because you know what? That's what we're talking about today. We're talking about faith. And I like to approach the idea of, or a conversation of faith in a gentle way, because it's really easy to use the idea that if you're uncomfortable right now, you're just not showing enough faith. And that just couldn't be further from the truth. The faith shows up in our vulnerability. In fact, Brene Brown, the brilliant, you know what Brene Brown is? I decided this. Brene Brown is a modern day Ralph Waldo Emerson. That's who Brene Brown is. If you don't know who she is, you need to look up her, do some YouTubes with her, because she's awesome. But Brene Brown teaches vulnerability, and she's a researcher. She's a scientist, but she understands from the work that she's done how important that is. And she just very bluntly states that if you haven't felt vulnerable, you have not been practicing faith. But better than that, I found this quote from her. This one kind of knocks my socks off. Brene Brown: faith minus vulnerability and mystery equals extremism. See, that's where fundamentalism comes from, thinking that you have the only truth. She says, if you've got all the answers, then don't call what you do faith. It's a pretty bold statement. So what a beautiful invitation for us to feel a little vulnerable this week, so that we can land in those ideas that we are certain about. And sometimes for me, it's like remembering, right? That's what I love about prayer. It's like right where I am, God is. I like to start a prayer that way because I remember. It wakes me up yet again to stand in the things that I do know to be true, and to then rest a little easier in the areas of life where I don't know what's for sure true. Certainty. Spiritual truth. Feast on these things, Holmes says. And so that's what we're invited to do. There are truths that never change. And I have a very favorite scripture from Philippians that I share from time to time. And these are the days where I really lean into these passages from scripture that have always comforted me. There's that passage in Philippians that says, whatever things are true and just, whatever things are pure and lovely, whatever things that are of good report, think on these things. Think on the things that are just and true and lovely and of good report, which means for me, I want to be careful of the news that is not of good report. I want to make sure that there's a balance in my life and that I lean toward looking at what's working in the world. I lean into the truths that I can stand on that are unchanging. Helen Keller, oh my goodness, listen to these words of Helen Keller. Faith is a strength by which a shattered world shall emerge into the light. faith is the strength by which a shattered world shall emerge into the light. This is what we're doing right now. The world is shattered and the light is emerging, and we are all light workers now, though I hate to coin anything that sounds a little too new agey, but we are. If we are willing to stand in the truth, if we are willing to have a spiritual practice, to practice what we believe, to regularly check in and know again what is certain, and yet to be open at the top so that our heart stays soft, that our mind stays open, so that we don't close off and think we have it all figured out. That's when we bring light to the planet. And so I want to close this morning with this fabulous short story that I read this week. I'm reading this book. It's probably somebody's dissertation. I've had it in my library, my personal library, for years. And every now and then it's good to lose a book and to hunt for it, because then you find other books that you didn't remember you owned. And so I found this book, and all the book is about is the way that people rise after a disaster, the way people meet and work together in a disaster. And there are dozens of gorgeous, gorgeous stories that I will be using in the weeks ahead to uplift me so that I can remember that truth. And by the way, the one thing they document in the book is that all the stories of the horrible things that happen when people take advantage of the situation, or when I'm sorry, all my words are gone today. The trauma before we hit the play button and really made it play, cleaned out all my pretty fancy words. But the report says that all the things we hear about people that take advantage of others and break into stores and steal things or steal our personal things, those are grossly overreported, and that those numbers are so minute in comparison to the good that people rise to share in, that again, we are cautioned to notice whether or not you're reading the good news or just taking in the bad news. Are you feasting on that which will help you? So I found this story, and it's about the time in 2003 when there was this massive power outage in northeastern America. So the northeastern part of the United States, and then up into parts of Canada, there was no electricity. And though the power outage only lasted a couple of days, there were nearly 100 deaths just due to accidents that happened in the darkness. So it was a serious matter. When the power goes out, it's a serious matter. But there's something else that happened. On the night of August 15th in 2003 in New York City, imagine that it's hot and it's muggy. And for the first time in a long, long time, a rare occurrence, all of the artificial light in the city was gone. And the people who thought to look up into the night sky could see the Milky Way. Imagine that. The people in the city who usually don't even try and see the night sky, the people could look up and they realized that they were living under a canopy of stars, that they could see the heavens, that the light pollution cleared, and they could see that right where they were, there they were, looking upward at the heavens. And so an event has occurred in our lives. And the airs have cleared and the waters have cleared, and we've heard some pretty interesting stories about what that looks like for right now, temporarily. But I want us to realize that we can see the heavens whenever the pollution is cleared away. Sometimes it's just our polluted thinking that blocks us from understanding that the kingdom of heaven is already within us. And so, in the same way that the mystics encourage us to look up to keep that Godward gaze, we are encouraged to know what is certain, to know that the truth can never be diminished, to know that there is a solid, substantial gift from the heavens, and we are always in that place. So abstain from contemplating those uncertainties. Know in whom you have believed, and that's your place to stand. Oh, and so it's time for us to stand in truth, to turn within, and we will treat ourselves to just a short moment of the experience of prayer. And so let's just get really clear. Let us just pause for a moment, turn within, and see that there's peace. Just feel that love of God within. Because it is true, it is certain that right where we are, God is. That there is no possibility of any limitation of that magnificent presence of God in our life, therefore the presence of good in our life. We become increasingly aware that this is a universe we live in and it is for us. And everything we need to move through every and all conditions in our lives, everything we need is already given. And so we just part the fog. We tear the veil and we open ourselves to recognize the heavens above as well as the heaven within. And so resting here in this sacred place where nothing is broken or less than, where we are fully supplied with all the good that we need, all the good that we desire, every evidence of what we are encouraged to do next. We are called forward and we know how to put one foot in front of the other. We know how to let go and to let God simply hold us sweetly. We know how to trust in a universe that has created perfect order, and that this is a time in history where that order is being revealed to us again, where we are remembering in a collective consciousness that life is good and that life is eternal. And so, sitting in the middle of this gorgeously orbed life that is purely divine, recognizing the wisdom of the sages, that the wisdom that has been articulated for thousands of years, and also standing in the wonder of it all. We can round this next bend with that joyous anticipation, knowing that we are not deprived in any way. We are not deprived because we are fully sustained and supported and loved and guided. And I feel that and sense that in a powerful way. And so together right now, together, even though we sit in separate places, we open ourselves to be vessels to receive that grace of God. We call it forward and we just fill ourselves up with this beautiful truth. We allow it to be washed over us. We allow ourselves to overflow with that good, so there is plenty to give and to share. I just say thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, life. Thank you, infinite spirit. I release these words into the powerful action of the law, resting in love, allowing it to be, and together we say, and so it is. Woo, and so. It's my best word whisker. I'm working on it, though. I'm working on it. Lots of chance now that I get to see myself occasionally. Oh, so it's time for our offering, but I want to tell you something. I want to tell you two things. One is I am having probably the best fun of the week is on Thursday nights with Reverend Clyde when we're doing a Zoom call, 1 hour. It's only a 1 hour commitment, and that makes it kind of special because it's not 2 hours, it's only 1 hour. Anybody can get on, check the website, go look at the newsletter. That information is there. Join us. We had, I don't know, 10 of us all together, I think, last week. And seeing your faces just makes me so happy, and laughing together. And it's so wonderful because we got no lesson. It's totally spontaneous. We're just speaking from our hearts and enjoying each other's company. And so if you're missing family, you want your spiritual family and you want some time, you can phone in. I recommend, if you have any ability to see us, do that because it is really, really way too fun. So do that. And my other thing I wanted to mention today, here's my offering and my husband's offering, and we got our stimulus check. So I'm tithing from my stimulus check, and I am overwhelmed in immense joy for all of you. Many of you have done the same already. So thank you, thank you, thank you. What a joy it is to know that we are going to be financially stable through these uncertain times because we know where to stand in certainty, in truth. Thank you. I love you. Namaste. See you again soon. Bye now.